Turn-based RPGs are having a serious moment right now, and the Switch library is absolutely loaded with great ones. Whether you're new to the genre or a longtime fan, this list has something for you, from legendary remakes to brand new hits. Let's get into it. Pokémon Legends Arceus is the game that finally made the franchise feel fresh again. Set in the ancient Hisui region, a far-past version of Sinnoh, you're sent back in time to build the first Pokédex. The world is semi-open, split into large zones full of wild Pokémon going about their lives, and you have to actually sneak up, observe, and catch them using Pokéballs you can throw yourself sometimes, before even entering a battle. When fights do happen, the turn-based system gets a twist. Moves now come in strong and agile styles, letting you sacrifice power for extra turns or hit harder and wait longer. It fundamentally changes how you think about Pokémon combat. The story is quieter and more personal than mainline games, built around mystery and belonging. On Switch 2, the game runs rock solid at 30 frames per second, with a noticeably sharper image thanks to the handheld boost mode, a major upgrade over the original Switch's frame dips. A must revisit. Octopath Traveler 0 is the third entry in the series, and the first to let you build your own custom protagonist. It's a prequel, set in the familiar realm of Orstera, telling an epic story of restoration and retribution. Your hometown of Wishvale gets burned to the ground, and getting it back means going up against some seriously dangerous people. Over 30 characters can join your party of 8, each with their own stories and abilities. And the path action system returns, letting you interact with NPCs based on your influence in wealth, power, or fame. The break and boost battle system, where you exploit enemy weaknesses to break their guard and then pile on boosted attacks, is as satisfying as ever. The HD 2D art style looks stunning on both Switch systems, and the Switch 2 version runs smoothly with no frame rate issues. If you're new to the series, you can genuinely start here since it's a prequel, and the 3-hour prologue demo carries progress to the full game.
Be strong!
Ready.
Pokémon Scarlet and Violet are the first truly open-world Pokémon games, letting you roam a vast Mediterranean-inspired region in any order you choose. The 3 storylines, a gym challenge, a Path of Legends hunting Titan Pokémon, and a team-focused operation run simultaneously, and you can tackle them however you like. The turn-based Pokémon battles are the same core formula fans love, but the open world adds real stakes to exploration, since high-level Pokémon genuinely appear in the wild and can be hostile. The games shipped with rough performance on original Switch, but on Switch 2, with the free Nintendo update, they now run at a much more consistent 60 frames per second in docked mode, with cleaner visuals using DLSS upscaling. It's essentially a different game technically. The story, especially the third path, hits harder than most mainline Pokémon narratives, with some genuinely surprising emotional moments late in the game. Dragon Quest III HD 2D Remake takes one of the most important JRPGs ever made and rebuilds it from scratch in Square Enix's gorgeous HD 2D art style. That mix of pixel sprites and lush 3D backgrounds with depth of field effects that make everything look like a living diorama. You're the child of the legendary hero Ortega, setting out to finish the journey your father never could. You assemble a custom party from multiple classes: warriors, mages, priests, merchants, and the vocation system lets characters switch classes at higher levels, keeping progression flexible and rewarding. The story quietly builds to one of the most iconic payoffs in JRPG history. Originally rough on original Switch in busier areas, Square Enix released a free Switch 2 patch with graphics and frame rate options, giving players the choice to prioritize performance or visual fidelity. Both modes are a significant step up over the original release. Tactics Ogre Reborn is a remaster of the 1995 classic that inspired a whole generation of tactical RPGs, including Final Fantasy Tactics. You play as Denim, a young man caught in the middle of a brutal civil war in the island nation of Valeria, where different factions are fighting for control along ethnic and political lines. The decisions you make, including a pivotal choice early on that changes the entire story, shape how Denim is perceived and which path the narrative takes. Combat plays out on isometric grid maps where unit placement, terrain elevation, and class matchups all matter. The chariot system lets you rewind turns to undo mistakes without starting the whole battle over, which is a genuinely brilliant addition. The remaster includes voice acting, improved visuals, and a reworked soundtrack. On Switch 2, it runs via backward compatibility and holds up well. A dense, mature tactical experience that rewards patience. Monster Hunter Stories 3 is built exclusively for Switch 2 and newer hardware, and the visual jump from the previous entries is immediately obvious. You play as the heir of Azuria, a kingdom dealing with a spreading crystal encroachment, a disaster that's turning land and creatures to crystal. You team up with Eleanor, princess of the rival kingdom Vermeil, to find a solution before everything falls apart and war breaks out between the two nations. Like the previous Stories games, you bond with monsters called Monsties, capturing eggs, hatching them, and taking them into battle alongside you. The turn-based combat is built around a rock, paper, scissors style head-to-head system, where reading your enemy's attack type is the key to winning. On Switch 2, the game looks sharp and detailed, using the RE engine, running smoothly with minor frame rate dips in some areas. Reviewers clocked 40+ hours for the main story. Chained Echoes is a 16-bit style JRPG made almost entirely by one person, Matthias Linda. And the fact that it holds up against games made by full studios is genuinely impressive. It's set on the continent of Volandis, where three kingdoms have been locked in a brutal war for decades. You follow a group of soldiers, mercenaries, and rebels whose paths cross in ways that keep the story moving at a brisk, surprising pace. The combat system revolves around an overdrive meter that fills as you fight. Stay in a sweet spot on the gauge and your team gets buffs. Push too far and you take penalties. It forces you to constantly think about which abilities you're using, rather than just spamming your strongest moves. Sky Armor mechs add another layer, letting characters pilot giant robots in certain fights. The writing is sharp, the pacing is tight, and there are almost no random encounters. Encounters are visible on the map. Dragon Quest VII Reimagined takes the notoriously long and complex 2000 JRPG and makes it genuinely accessible. The original game on PS1 could take well over 100 hours and had a slow opening. This remake rebuilds everything in a warm, handcrafted 3D art style and streamlines the narrative into a tighter, more focused series of vignettes. You play as Oster, a fisherman's son who discovers stone fragments that unlock portals to lost eras of history, civilizations that were wiped from the present world. You travel back in time, restore those lost peoples, and slowly rebuild the world piece by piece. The vocation system returns with the new moonlighting mechanic, letting you have two classes active simultaneously for combined skill access. Battle speed adjustments and an auto-battle option make grinding much less of a chore. On Switch 2, the game runs at a solid 60 frames per second and looks crisp. Triangle Strategy is a tactical RPG from Square Enix that leans hard into political storytelling. Three kingdoms, Glenbrook, Aesfrost, and Hyzonte, are in a tense piece held together by two resources, salt and iron. You play as Serenoa Wolfort, a young nobleman whose choices during a brewing conflict ripple outward across the entire story. The Scales of Conviction mechanic is one of the most interesting things in the game. When a major decision needs to be made, you have to convince your own allies to vote in your favor. And the votes are cast based on how well you've cultivated each person's trust and values throughout the game. Tactical battles play out on isometric grid maps, with height and terrain advantages mattering a lot. And the HD 2D art style looks beautiful. On Switch 2, it runs via backward compatibility and plays smoothly. There's community interest in a proper Switch 2 upgrade, but even without one, it holds up well.
Have another! Did you see that? Forward!
Trails in the Sky First Chapter is a ground-up remake of the very first game in Nihon Falcom's massive Trails series, and it's easily the best starting point for anyone who's ever wanted to get into this franchise. You play as Estelle Bright, a young bracer in training, and her adoptive brother Joshua as they take on jobs across the Liberel Kingdom. The world building is incredibly dense. Every NPC in every town has their own dialogue that updates as the story progresses, and the entire kingdom feels lived in and real. The turn-based combat is tactical and grid-based, rewarding smart positioning and ability synergy. On Switch 2, the Nintendo Switch 2 edition runs at 1080p 60 frames per second in one mode and 4K 30 frames per second in another, a significant upgrade. You can also grab the Switch 1 version and upgrade to the Switch 2 edition for just $1. Final Weapon gave it a 4.5 out of 5, calling it the perfect introduction to Trails.
My turn!
Dragon Quest I and II HD 2D remake packages, two foundational JRPGs into one release, and rebuilds them in the HD 2D art style with new story content, including an entirely new underwater area called the Seabed with new dungeons and enemies. Dragon Quest I is the RPG that effectively launched the entire JRPG genre in Japan, a small solo adventure where you're the descendant of a legendary hero going to face the Dragon Lord. Dragon Quest II expands dramatically with multiple party members and a bigger world. Both games have been modernized significantly. The menus are clean, the pacing is improved, and the new content makes each journey feel more substantial than the originals. Nintendo Life gave it a 9 out of 10, and it won RPG of the Month at the time of release. On Switch 2, it runs at solid performance with load times noticeably faster than the Switch version. Final Fantasy Tactics: The Ivalice Chronicles is the remake that fans waited nearly 30 years for, and it delivers. Set in the kingdom of Ivalice following a devastating war, the story follows Ramza Bulv, a young noble who gets caught up in a conspiracy involving the line of succession, corrupt institutions, and forces that go far beyond political scheming. The narrative is dense, layered, and genuinely sophisticated, and now fully voiced for the first time, making every story beat land harder. The core tactical gameplay puts squads of units on isometric grids where height, terrain, and class positioning determine the outcome. The CT speed system means faster units act more often, rewarding thoughtful team building. On Switch 2, it runs at a locked 60 frames per second in docked mode at 1080p and handheld at 720p. It won Best Sim/Strategy at the Game Awards 2025, one of the best tactical RPGs ever made, and now the definitive version of it.
My turn.
Fire Emblem Three Houses is the kind of game that people lose hundreds of hours to without blinking, and for good reason. You play as Byleth, a traveling mercenary who becomes a professor at Garrigmach Monastery, a military academy attended by students from 3 rival noble houses. Before you even fight anyone, you're managing relationships, teaching classes, scheduling training sessions, and going on fishing trips. The social and school management layer is genuinely compelling on its own, and then the tactical turn-based combat arrives and adds an entirely different layer of depth. Each playthrough tells a fundamentally different story depending on which house you choose, and all 4 routes differ substantially in plot and available characters. On Switch 2, the game runs at its 30 frames per second target, but the image quality is significantly improved via the handheld boost mode, one of the most noticeable visual upgrades of any Switch 1 game.
I'll crush them all. Is that all? Fighting is...
Dragon Quest XI's is the gold standard for approachable JRPGs. It looks beautiful, it's endlessly charming, and it commits to delivering a fully complete, satisfying, epic adventure without making you work for it. You play as the Luminary, a young man who discovers he's the reincarnation of a legendary hero, and you assemble a party of colorful, well-written companions across a journey that spans continents and time. The turn-based combat is clean, party abilities are intuitive, and each character has a distinct role and personality that makes building your team feel personal. The Definitive Edition adds a 2D mode that switches the graphics to classic 16-bit style, new story arcs for side characters, and orchestrated music. On Switch 2, it looks crisp and runs smoothly via backward compatibility. A dedicated Switch 2 Definitive Edition is confirmed for September 24th, 2026, with further enhancements. If you've never played a Dragon Quest game, this is exactly where to start.
Go on! You can do it!
Persona 5 Royal is one of the greatest JRPGs ever made, and having it on Switch is something that felt impossible just a few years ago. You play as a high school student who gets framed for a crime he didn't commit and is placed on probation in Tokyo. By night, he and a group of friends discover the metaverse, a cognitive world where people's repressed desires form massive supernatural palaces and become the Phantom Thieves, stealing the hearts of corrupt adults to force them to confess. Days are split between school life, building relationships with your confidants, managing stats like knowledge and charm, and exploring palaces in turn-based battles that use Persona's powerful manifestations of each character's personality. The Royal version adds an entirely new semester, new content throughout the game, and a new character.
Persona! Go down!
If you're building a JRPG backlog on Switch, you really can't go wrong anywhere here. Drop a comment on which one you're jumping into first, and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next.